I never thought my life would turn into one of those twisted soap operas you see on TV, where betrayal lurks right under your nose. But here I am, 35-year-old Mark Thompson, standing on the rubble of what I once thought was a perfect life. A successful software engineer, living in a comfortable suburban home with my 32-year-old wife, Emily, and my best friend, Jason, a 36-year-old financial advisor who was practically a brother to me. That's how we all fit into the picture until the day everything went up in flames. Emily and I had been married for 10 years. She worked as a marketing manager, and on the surface, things seemed good. Sure, we had our ups and downs like any couple, but I had no reason to think she was unhappy. Jason and I had been best friends since college, inseparable through thick and thin. Our bond was ironclad, or so I thought. We all hung out regularly, and I trusted Jason like a brother. He was always over at our house, having dinner, drinks, and watching the game. I didn't think twice about it. Why would I? But I should have seen the signs. It all started when Emily became more distant, subtle things at first. She stopped kissing me goodbye in the mornings, her phone was always face down, and she had suddenly developed a girls' night routine every Thursday, which, oddly enough, Jason always seemed to be busy on. Still, I shrugged it off. I told myself I was being paranoid, and I didn't want to be the over-controlling husband who doubted his wife's every move. I had no clue what kind of storm was coming my way. The turning point came one evening when I came home early from a work trip, completely unannounced. Emily had no idea I was coming back that night. I wanted to surprise her, but instead, I was the one who got the surprise. The house was dark when I walked in, so I tiptoed upstairs, thinking she might already be in bed. When I opened the bedroom door, the sight before me was something out of a nightmare. There they were, Emily and Jason, tangled together in my bed. My heart stopped, and my vision blurred as the rage surged through me like wildfire. Emily gasped and scrambled to cover herself, while Jason jumped up, his face pale as a ghost. Neither of them said a word. What could they say? The betrayal that hung in the air was so thick you could choke on it. My wife, the woman I had loved for a decade, and my best friend, the one man I would have trusted with my life, had been sleeping together behind my back. In my house, in my bed. It wasn't just an affair, it was a calculated betrayal by the two people I trusted the most. I wanted to scream, to throw punches, to tear the entire room apart, but instead, I just stood there frozen. Emily tried to speak, her lips trembling. Mark, I am so sorry, it's not what it looks like. Not what it looks like? Are you kidding me? The audacity of it sent my blood boiling. Jason stood there like a coward, not even meeting my eyes. He had nothing to say. He didn't even try to defend himself. In that moment, I felt like I had been ripped apart at the seams, like the life I had built was crumbling into ashes. I was in disbelief, too numb to feel anything but a hollow ache inside my chest. It was like watching a train wreck in slow motion, knowing there was nothing I could do to stop it. After what felt like an eternity, I finally managed to find my voice, though it came out as a low, dangerous growl. Get out. Jason didn't argue. He grabbed his clothes and bolted out of the room, out of the house, leaving only Emily and I in the thick silence. I turned to her, and she had the nerve to start crying, as if she were the victim. Her mascara streaked down her face, and she clutched the sheets to her chest, sobbing uncontrollably. Mark, please, it was a mistake. I never meant for this to happen. It didn't mean anything, I swear. I couldn't stand to look at her. The woman I once adored now looked like a stranger, a liar, a cheat. My fists clenched by my sides as I fought the urge to lash out, but I couldn't. I wouldn't let myself sink to their level. How long? My voice was barely a whisper, yet it sliced through the air like a knife. Emily's sobs hitched. She hesitated. A few months. Months? They'd been carrying on 4 months. Every Thursday night, every time Jason and I clinked beers in the backyard, every smile and laugh between the three of us, it was all a lie. My world felt like it was spiraling out of control. The wall seemed to close in on me, and all I could think was how I had been so stupid, so blind to everything happening right under my nose. I didn't stay to hear more. I grabbed my car keys and left the house. I drove aimlessly through the night, not even knowing where I was going. I just needed to get away from the nightmare I had walked into. Every mile I drove, the weight of betrayal settled deeper into my bones. My best friend had stolen my wife, and my wife had let him. But this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. They would pay for what they'd done. I didn't know how, but the burning rage inside me promised that I would find a way to make them regret it. This wasn't just about losing my wife or my best friend. It was about being humiliated, disrespected, and broken. And I wasn't going to stay broken for long. As I pulled into a hotel parking lot, it dawned on me that everything would change from this point on. Revenge was a dish best served cold, and I planned to serve it with ice in my veins. In that moment, I realized the game wasn't over. It was just beginning. It's funny how life works. One minute, you're drowning in the betrayal of your wife and your best friend. The next, a twist so sick it could only belong in a soap opera slams into your life like a freight train. I didn't speak to Emily for a week after I caught her with Jason. A week of silence, of sleepless nights in hotel rooms, haunted by the image of them together. I wasn't ready to face her. I didn't know if I'd ever be. But she, of course, tried to reach out, texts, voicemails, and a few times, she even showed up at the hotel. I ignored her. I wasn't interested in her half-assed apologies. The betrayal was too fresh, too raw, but I couldn't avoid her forever. We had to talk about what came next: divorce, separation of assets, all the ugly logistics of ending a life built on lies. So, after a week, I finally called her and told her I'd come by the house. I wanted answers. I deserved to know why, how, and for what reason she thought it was okay to throw away 10 years of marriage. I also wanted to see her reaction, to see the guilt, the shame in her eyes. It wasn't much, but it was something. I needed something to cling to. I pulled up to the house, my stomach in knots, wondering if Jason would be there, too. The thought of him being anywhere near that house made my blood boil, but thankfully, when I walked inside, it was just Emily. She sat on the couch, looking disheveled, her hair a mess and her eyes swollen from what must have been days of crying. The house, usually immaculate, was littered with takeout containers and half-empty wine bottles, a far cry from the picture-perfect home we'd lived in 4 years. "Mark," she started, her voice shaky, "I'm so sorry. I can't even begin to explain how much I regret." I held up my hand, cutting her off. "Spare me the rehearsed apology, Emily. I didn't come here for that." She winced, but nodded. Good. She needed to feel the weight of what she'd done. "Why?" I demanded, pacing in front of her like a caged animal. "Why, Jason? Why betray me with the one person I trusted more than anyone?" Emily took a deep breath, wringing her hands together. "It wasn't about you, Mark. I swear, I don't even know how it happened. It started small, just flirting, and then, it got out of control. I didn't mean for any of this to happen." I clenched my jaw. "Out of control? You're telling me this was just some accident? That you've slipped into bed with my best friend?" Her face crumpled, tears threatening to spill again. "It wasn't like that. I was feeling lonely, okay? You've been so distant lately, always working, always preoccupied. I felt like you weren't even there anymore, and Jason, he was just there, and he listened." I scoffed. "So, what? You thought sleeping with him was the answer to that? Jesus, Emily, if you were unhappy, you could have just talked to me." I know, she whispered, wiping her tears. "But I didn't know how to fix it, and then it just happened. And I'm so sorry, Mark. I never wanted to hurt you. I know I made the biggest mistake of my life." I crossed my arms, the walls of the room seeming to close in as she continued rambling through her hollow excuses. I didn't buy it. She was sorry she got caught, not for what she'd done. I opened my mouth to say as much when suddenly, something she said earlier echoed in my mind. Lonely, distant, out of control. My brain started to churn, piecing together fragments of the past few months. Emily's behavior had changed, but so had Jason's. He had always been the more outgoing one between us, the life of the party, but lately, he'd been different. More secretive, more anxious. I hadn't thought much of it at the time, but now it clicked. It all started making sense in a way that made my stomach turn. "Emily," I said slowly, narrowing my eyes at her, "how long has this been going on?" She looked up at me, her lip trembling. "I told you, a few months." "Exactly how many months?" I pressed, stepping closer. Her gaze flickered to the floor. "I don't remember exactly." "Bullshit, you remember. Tell me." She was shaking now, her face pale. She swallowed hard, refusing to meet my eyes. 6 months, she whispered. I froze. 6 months. 6 months ago was the night Jason and I went out for drinks to celebrate him landing that huge new client. I remember it clearly because it was one of the last times he and I had a proper night out together, but that wasn't the only reason. 6 months ago, Emily came to me and told me she was pregnant. The floor seemed to drop out from under me. My heart pounded in my chest as the realization hit me like a sledgehammer. "Emily," my voice was barely above a whisper. "The baby." She flinched, her hands flying to her stomach as though to protect herself from the accusation she knew was coming. "Is it Jason's?" The words hung in the air, sharp as a knife. Emily's silence was the only answer I needed, but I couldn't stop myself from demanding more. Jason's? I growled, my hands shaking with fury. She started sobbing, her hands covering her face. I don't know, okay? The world spun around me, my mind reeling. My wife wasn't just having an affair with my best friend. She might be carrying his child. For months, I had been excited, planning for a family, thinking I was about to become a father. And all along, it could have been Jason's kid, not mine, not the child I had dreamed of raising. My fists clenched at my sides, my knuckles turning white. It was like being stabbed in the gut twice over, the betrayal reaching new, unimaginable depths. How could you do this to me? I choked out, my voice breaking. Emily's sobs only grew louder, but I didn't care. She could cry all she wanted, it wouldn't change the fact that she had destroyed everything. Our marriage, our friendship, my future, all of it was gone. And Jason was going to pay for this. He had slept with my wife, and now he might have fathered the child I thought was mine. A cold, vengeful calm settled over me, replacing the red-hot rage that had threatened to consume me. This wasn't going to end with her tears and apologies. No, this was far from over. Jason wasn't going to walk away from this unscathed. He had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, and I was going to make sure he regretted every single moment of it. Emily didn't deserve my wrath right now. She wasn't worth it. But Jason? He was going to feel every ounce of the betrayal, the pain, and the humiliation he had put me through, and I had just the plan to make sure of it. You're going to get a paternity test, I said coldly, cutting through her sobs. And when it comes back, we'll deal with whatever comes next. But don't think for a second this is over. You're not getting off that easy. I turned on my heel and walked out of the house without looking back. Emily's cries echoed behind me, but they were just noise now, fading into the background. There was only one thing on my mind as I got into my car and sped down the street. Jason was going to pay for this betrayal, and I wasn't going to stop until I had my revenge. There's a strange kind of peace that comes after the storm. It's not serenity, but a cold, calculated calm. That's where I found myself in the days following my confrontation with Emily. I wasn't broken anymore, not like before. No, now I was something else, focused, driven. Rage and heartbreak had been replaced with a single, all-consuming purpose, revenge. Jason had always been the alpha in our friendship, the charismatic guy everyone gravitated toward. He was good-looking, charming, had a magnetic personality that pulled people in. He used it to his advantage in business, in social circles, and apparently, in my marriage. It was clear now that I had been a pawn in his little game, the loyal friend who didn't notice the knife being slipped between his ribs. But Jason didn't know me as well as he thought. Sure, I wasn't flashy or loud, but I was smart. I knew how to think things through, how to plan. And now, I was going to use every bit of that intelligence to destroy him from the inside out. The first step was gathering information. I didn't rush into things, didn't fly off the handle like some jilted lover seeking immediate revenge. That's what Jason would expect, some explosive confrontation where I lost my cool. But I wasn't going to give him that satisfaction. No, I was going to dismantle him slowly, piece by piece. I started with his business. Jason had built his reputation as a real estate agent by being ruthless, cutting deals with no regard for who got hurt in the process. His company, Prime Properties, was one of the top firms in the city, thanks to his aggressive sales tactics and relentless networking. But I knew there were skeletons in his closet. In real estate, nobody climbs to the top without making a few enemies or bending the rules. I just had to find the right ones. I spent the next few days digging through public records, combing through business deals, and making phone calls to old contacts we had shared over the years. It was amazing what people were willing to share when they thought they were talking off the record. After hours of research, I found it. 3 years ago, Jason had cut a shady deal with a developer who was later investigated for fraud. The details of the case were buried deep, but not deep enough. Jason had never been directly implicated, but it was enough to plant a seed of doubt in the right circles. Next, I had to make sure that seed grew. I started by leaking the information anonymously to a few journalists I knew who covered the business beat. Jason was too careful to leave a direct trail of wrongdoing, but the mere suggestion of impropriety was enough to stir up whispers. Soon, stories began popping up in local media, nothing too damning, just subtle suggestions that Prime Properties might not be as clean as it appeared. Jason called me a few days later, clearly rattled. "Mark, have you heard about these rumors going around? Someone's trying to take me down." I played dumb. "What rumors?" "Some bullshit about a deal I made with that developer years ago. You remember, right? The guy who turned out to be a fraud? Now people are trying to link me to him." It's all crap, but it's starting to hurt business. Wow, that's crazy, man, I said, feigning concern. You think it's just some competitor trying to get at you? Probably. Who knows? I pissed off a lot of people on my way up. But this could ruin me if it gets any bigger. I could hear the frustration in his voice, the cracks forming in his usually confident demeanor. Good. This was just the beginning. After hanging up, I knew I needed to keep the pressure on. The rumors were enough to shake Jason, but not enough to bring him down. I needed something more personal, something that would hit him where it hurt most, his image. Jason's entire persona was built around being a self-made, successful businessman with a picture-perfect life. He flaunted it every chance he got, the expensive cars, the luxury vacations, and most of all, his relationship with his fiancée, Samantha. Yeah, that's right. Fiancée. Turns out Jason hadn't just been screwing around with my wife, he was engaged to someone else the whole time. Samantha was a model, 10 years younger than him, drop-dead gorgeous. Their relationship was the stuff of Instagram envy, romantic getaways, extravagant gifts, all documented for their thousands of followers. What Samantha didn't know was that while Jason was playing the role of perfect fiancé to her, he was sneaking behind her back with Emily. The guy really had no limits. I had never met Samantha personally, but I knew enough about her from social media. She was all about appearances, all about that fairy tale life. Jason was her Prince Charming, her meal ticket into the elite. She worshipped him, and he used her as part of his fake it. That's when it hit me. If I could tear down that relationship, Jason's entire world would crumble. The tricky part was figuring out how to get to Samantha without it seeming suspicious. I couldn't just show up and tell her about Jason's affair. She wouldn't believe me, and it would only give Jason a heads up that I was coming for him. So, I had to get creative. I reached out to an old college friend who worked in PR, someone who knew how to manipulate public perception. I explained the situation, leaving out the parts about my personal vendetta, and framed it as a hypothetical situation. My friend didn't ask too many questions. For the right price, he was more than happy to help. A few days later, Samantha received an anonymous tip. Someone had sent her pictures of Jason and Emily together, old photos from a party we had all attended where they were a little too close for comfort. There were no explicit images, but the implication was there. Along with the photos was a note that simply read, "You don't know the real Jason." I knew Samantha well enough to predict her reaction. She was the kind of woman who lived for drama, who couldn't resist digging deeper when something felt off. I expected her to confront Jason immediately, but to my surprise, she didn't. Instead, she went full detective mode. Over the next few weeks, she started following him, checking his phone when he wasn't looking, even hiring a private investigator to track his movements. And wouldn't you know it, Jason slipped up. He met Emily for drinks one night at a bar outside the city, probably thinking no one would recognize them. But Samantha had eyes on him. The private investigator snapped photos of them laughing together, of Jason with his hand on Emily's thigh, and delivered them straight to Samantha. The next morning, she dumped him in the most public way possible. Samantha posted a long, emotional message on Instagram, complete with the damning photos. She didn't name Emily directly, but she made it clear that Jason had been cheating on her. The post went viral, spreading like wildfire across social media. Jason's perfect image was shattered in an instant. His business partners, friends, and clients all saw him for what he was, a cheater, a liar, and a fraud. Jason called me that afternoon, desperate and defeated. "Mark, you've got to help me," he begged. Samantha found out about Emily. She posted everything online. "My business is tanking. Everyone's pulling out of deals, and I'm losing clients left and right." I could hear the panic in his voice, the desperation of a man whose life was falling apart. It was almost satisfying, almost. "Why would you think I'd help you, Jason?" I asked, my voice cold. "You brought this on yourself." He was silent for a moment, then muttered, "I didn't mean for it to go this far. I didn't think she'd find out." "Well, she did, and now you get to live with the consequences." I hung up before he could say another word. The pieces were falling into place. Jason's business was collapsing, his personal life was in ruins, and he was spiraling out of control. But this wasn't the end. No, the final blow was still coming. Jason had taken everything from me, my trust, my marriage, and the future I thought I had. But now, I was taking everything from him. And soon, I would make sure he knew exactly how it felt to lose it all. There's a moment, just before you strike, when time seems to slow down. Every detail comes into sharp focus, every sound seems amplified, and you're aware of everything around you, your heartbeat, the rush of blood in your ears, the slight tremor in your fingers. That's how I felt the day I decided to put the final phase of my plan into motion. Jason was already on his knees, his world crumbling around him, but I wanted to make sure he stayed down. He needed to feel the weight of everything he'd done, and I was going to deliver the knockout punch. After Samantha's public breakup, Jason had gone into full-blown damage control mode. He hired a PR firm, gave sob story interviews, and tried to spin the narrative. He even posted a tearful apology online, claiming that he had made mistakes and lost the love of his life because of it. His goal was obvious: salvage what he could of his reputation, both professionally and personally. But the internet never forgets, and neither would I. My next move involved Emily. Emily and I hadn't spoken much since that night in the living room, where her crocodile tears meant nothing to me. She had texted me a few times, trying to explain, trying to justify her actions, but I left her on read. Now that Jason had been exposed, she probably felt as lost and humiliated as he did. In her mind, she had left me for a life that promised excitement and passion, but all she got in return was being branded the other woman by thousands of strangers online. I knew she would come crawling back. It was only a matter of time. And sure enough, she did. One evening, about a week after Jason's public implosion, Emily showed up at my doorstep, looking disheveled and hollow-eyed. She wore no makeup, her hair was pulled into a messy ponytail, and she looked nothing like the confident, stylish woman I used to know. I hadn't heard from her in days, and part of me wondered if she had been too ashamed to reach out after the scandal broke. I didn't let her in right away. Instead, I stood in the doorway, arms crossed, letting her squirm a little under my gaze. I just want to talk," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please, Mark, just let me explain." "Explain what?" I asked coldly. "How you ruined everything for nothing? How you traded our marriage for someone who was already playing you?" Her eyes filled with tears, and she dropped her head. I wasn't falling for it this time. The old Mark might have softened, might have caved at the sight of her crying, but that man was gone. Now, I was just waiting for the perfect moment to strike. "Can I come in?" she asked, sniffling. I stepped aside, letting her walk past me. She moved hesitantly, like she was expecting me to lash out at any moment. I wasn't going to. Not yet. I led her to the living room, the same place we'd had our last confrontation. She sat on the edge of the couch, wringing her hands nervously. I could see she was barely holding it together. "Good. What do you want, Emily?" I asked, standing across from her, not offering any comfort. "Why are you here?" She took a deep breath, her voice trembling. "I was wrong, Mark. I was so wrong about everything. I thought Jason was, I don't know, exciting. He made me feel alive again, like we were in college or something. But it wasn't real. It was all just an illusion. And now, everything's falling apart. He's losing his business, everyone's talking about him, and I don't even know who he is anymore." "You didn't know who he was before either," I said flatly. I know, and I hate myself for it. I've made a mess of everything, and I'm lost, Mark. I need you." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. She needed me, after all of this, after betraying me, after throwing away our marriage for a man who was cheating on her too. She wanted me to take her back, to play the role of the forgiving husband, to be the one who caught her when she fell. It was almost laughable, but instead of laughing, I took a deep breath and sat down in the armchair across from her. "You need me, huh?" She nodded, eyes wide, as if she thought she'd reached me. "Yes, Mark. I was wrong. I see that now. I never should have." I held up my hand, cutting her off. "Let me guess. You want me to forgive you? You want us to pick up the pieces of this disaster you created and pretend like none of this ever happened? You want me to be the safety net you can fall back into now that Jason's abandoned you?" Emily flinched, her face crumpling. "No, that's not what I meant. I want a chance to make things right. I know I hurt you, but we've been through so much together, and I can't just." "Stop," I said, my voice cold and firm. "You don't get to rewrite history, Emily. You made your choices. You destroyed this marriage, and now you have to live with the consequences." She blinked, clearly taken aback by the harshness in my voice. Maybe she thought I'd soften, that I'd be the same Mark who always put her feelings first, but not anymore, not after what she and Jason had done. Her lip trembled. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm begging you. I don't know where else to turn. I have nothing, Mark, nothing." That's when it hit me. This was the moment I had been waiting for. The moment when I would turn the tables completely. I leaned forward, making sure to hold her gaze. "You want me to take you back? Fine, but there's a catch." Her eyes widened, the faintest glimmer of hope sparking. "Anything. I'll do anything. I smiled, a cold, calculated smile. I want you to go to Jason. I want you to tell him that you regret ever leaving me for him. I want you to make him believe you still love me, that you're coming back to me. I want you to twist the knife. She looked confused. What? Why would I? Because I want him to feel what I felt, I said, my voice low and controlled. I want him to think he's lost everything, that even you, the woman he stole from me, has left him for good. I want him to suffer, and you're going to help me make that happen. Emily stared at me, stunned into silence. She hadn't expected this, hadn't anticipated that I would turn her into a weapon against Jason, but the wheels were already turning in her mind. I could see it, the conflict, the fear, but also the desire to win me back. But, if I do this, will you forgive me? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I leaned back in my chair, considering her question. If you do this, Emily, maybe, just maybe, I'll think about it. It was a lie, of course. I had no intention of ever forgiving her, no intention of ever taking her back. But she didn't need to know that. All she needed to do was play her part in the final act of this drama. Emily hesitated for a moment, then slowly nodded. Okay, I'll do it. A twisted sense of satisfaction surged through me. This was it. The final piece of the puzzle. Emily was going to tear Jason apart, just like they had torn me apart. And once Jason was at his lowest, when he thought he had nothing left, I would make sure he knew exactly who had orchestrated his downfall. But I wasn't finished yet. You'll do it tonight, I said. Go to him, tell him it's over, that you want to come back to me. Make it convincing. And then, we'll see where things go from there. She nodded again, looking more fragile than ever. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. As Emily left my house that night, I watched her go, knowing that she was walking straight into the trap I had set for both her and Jason. This was it, the moment I had been waiting for. Revenge wasn't just about making them feel pain. It was about making them feel hopeless, powerless, just like they had made me feel. And by the end of the night, Jason would know exactly what that felt like. The night after Emily left to carry out my plan felt like the longest of my life. It wasn't because I was anxious or uncertain, far from it. I was calm, focused, and in control. For the first time in months, I felt like I was the one pulling the strings. I had played my part carefully, setting everything in motion, and now it was just a matter of waiting for the pieces to fall. By morning, I still hadn't heard from her. I wasn't surprised. Emily had no doubt spent the night trying to twist Jason's mind in knots, telling him how much of a mistake their entire relationship had been, how much she missed me, how she never should have left me. Jason was arrogant, but even he couldn't be so blind as to not realize he'd lost everything. His ego must have been shredded, his career in tatters, and now even Emily was turning her back on him. But once high and mighty Jason would be lying in the gutter by the time she was finished with him. I poured myself a cup of coffee, settling into the kitchen table. I didn't need to check my phone. I knew things would unfold soon enough. The feeling of anticipation was different than anything I had ever experienced. I wasn't nervous, it was more like I was savoring every moment of Jason's inevitable collapse. Around noon, I finally got the text from Emily. Emily, it's done. I told him everything. He lost it. You were right, he didn't see it coming at all. I think he's falling apart. I smiled as I read it, imagining the scene, Jason's world shattering piece by piece, his rage, his confusion, the raw desperation in his eyes as he realized that even Emily, the woman he had stolen, was slipping away. He was now utterly alone, but I wasn't finished with him yet. After receiving the text, I allowed a few more days to pass. I needed Jason to marinate in his misery, to feel the sting of abandonment, to live in the ruins of his once perfect life. In the meantime, I kept Emily on a leash, feeding her just enough false hope to keep her believing I might actually take her back. It was easy, she was desperate. She didn't just want to fix her mistake, she wanted to escape her own guilt. I could tell she was suffering too, wondering if her plan had really been worth it. But her suffering didn't matter to me anymore. The only thing left to do was deliver the final blow. A few days later, I decided to pay Jason a visit. It wasn't difficult to find him, he hadn't left his apartment in days. The media had given up trying to get statements from him, and his once loyal clients had moved on to other agents. His reputation was in tatters. I knew he wouldn't be expecting me. I showed up at his front door around noon. There was no answer at first, so I knocked again, harder. I could hear faint movement inside, like someone was slowly dragging themselves across the room. Eventually, the door creaked open, and there he was, Jason, or what was left of him. He looked terrible. His eyes were bloodshot, his hair a greasy mess, and his clothes rumpled like he hadn't changed in days. The arrogant, self-assured man I had known was gone. In his place stood a hollowed-out version of himself, barely clinging to whatever was left of his pride. "Mark." His voice was hoarse, barely a whisper. What are you doing here?" I stared at him for a long moment, letting the silence stretch. I wanted him to squirm, to feel the weight of my presence. "I came to see how you're holding up," I finally said, stepping inside uninvited. Jason didn't try to stop me. He looked too defeated to care. The apartment was a mess. Empty bottles littered the floor, dirty clothes were piled on the furniture, and the air smelled stale, like someone had given up on life. I almost felt a pang of pity for him. Almost. Jason slumped onto the couch, burying his head in his hands. "She's gone," he muttered. "Emily, she left me. Said she made a mistake, that she wanted you back." I feigned a look of surprise. "Really? I hadn't heard that." Jason looked up at me, his eyes hollow. "You knew, didn't you? You planned this. She was never really coming back to me, was she?" I shrugged, leaning against the wall. "What can I say, Jason? Maybe you should have thought twice before you decided to stab me in the back. Actions have consequences, and you're living with yours." He shook his head, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. "You don't understand. Everything I did it because I thought I was winning. I thought I was the better man. And now I've lost everything." "You were never the better man," I said flatly. "You were just too full of yourself to see it." Jason stared at me, his face twisted with a mixture of rage and despair. I could see the fight had gone out of him. He wasn't even angry anymore, just broken. "What do you want from me, Mark?" he finally asked. "Are you here to gloat? To rub it in my face? Fine. You won. You took everything from me. Emily's gone, my career is over, what else is there?" I leaned in, my voice low and cold. "I don't want anything from you, Jason. I just want you to remember one thing, I didn't take anything from you. You lost it all on your own. You threw away your life for nothing. And now, you'll have to live with that." Jason didn't respond. He just sat there, staring at the floor, defeated. I turned to leave, but before I walked out, I said one last thing. "Oh, and by the way, Emily isn't coming back to me either. She's on her own now. You both are." Jason's head snapped up, confusion flashing in his eyes. "What? You're not taking her back?" I shook my head, a cold smile spreading across my face. "No, Jason. I never planned to take her back. She's nothing to me now, just like you." I walked out, leaving him in stunned silence, and as I stepped into the daylight, I felt a wave of satisfaction wash over me. The plan had worked perfectly. Jason had been completely and utterly destroyed, not just by the scandal, but by the realization that he had lost everything, his career, his relationship, and his self-respect. And Emily? She was left with nothing as well, abandoned by the man she had thought would be her salvation. But it wasn't just about revenge. It was about closure. I had spent so much time agonizing over what had happened, about how I had been betrayed, and now, for the first time, I felt free. I wasn't weighed down by anger or sadness anymore. Jason and Emily were nothing more than memories, and I was finally moving on. A week after my visit to Jason, I received a call from Emily. I didn't pick up. She left a voicemail, her voice shaky and tearful, begging me to talk to her, to give her another chance. I deleted it without listening to the whole thing. The truth was, I didn't need to hear her anymore. I didn't need any of it. I was done with both of them. I had my life back, and it felt damn good.